about today? We're talking about, of course, the one and only Mo Salah. I mean, he's been in the news in the past, 72 hours or so since that breakout interview whereby, he's kind of aired his grievances as to why he can't believe how he's being treated by the club. He believes that someone's trying to get him out of the club. And yeah, he's just dumbfounded. He just can't believe what's going on. I mean, first and foremost, you've got to kind of take into account what Salah has done for the club, what he's done for Liverpool. And he's been a great servant. And he's definitely a Liverpool legend for sure. I mean, if you look at his statistics, the statistics speak for itself, or speak for himself, and he's a well-accomplished player. And he's done all of that since coming to Liverpool. Of course, he'll definitely be considered as one of their all-time greats. Yeah, he's up there with your Dalglishes, he's up there with your Gerrards and your Ian Rushes, even your Groblars as well. I mean, the plaudits just keep on coming and coming and coming. However, there is a thin line. There is a thin line between what players say, their character, how they behave, and what the fans expect or the fans' expectations of that player is. So I think there are a few people that have kind of mentioned that, Salah is in jeopardy of ruining his legacy based on his recent interview. And saying that if you haven't heard the interview, you should check it out. I mean, it's not that long, but he's just kind of complaining about why he's on the bench and he can't believe that he's on the bench. And, when he signed his new contract, there was an agreement in place for a player of that caliber, a player of that stature. That's what he's alluding to, that a player of that stature or a player of his caliber shouldn't be on the bench. However, you've got to look at it from the manager's perspective. If you're playing shit and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing on the pitch, then by all means, the manager has the right to drop you. The manager has the right to drop you. Now, sometimes, these players don't understand that, yes, yesterday he could have been, the dog's bollocks. He could have been a fantastic player yesterday or even a week ago or even 2 years ago. But unfortunately, this thing called age catches up with you. You won't have the same intensity. You won't have the same burst as you once did. So, of course, your output may not be the same as it was before. But for the player, whereby a player kind of believes in their ability, they may still feel like, no, they are still the same. But if we're to be honest, Salah does not look like the same player. He doesn't. You've got to be honest. You've got to be honest. He doesn't look like the same player. And I think a lot of Liverpool fans will agree as well and say, no, he doesn't look like the same player. You're forgetting that this player is 33 years old. He signed his new contract, taking home about 400k, allegedly. So he's well paid for the job that he does. But if the fact of the matter is this season, he hasn't delivered. This season he's been underperforming and he's been below par. That's not taking anything away from his previous accomplishments. That's not taking anything away from the 2 Premier League titles he's won with Liverpool. It's taking anything away from the Champions League honours that he's attained with or acquired with Liverpool. That's not taking anything away from him. All the goals that he scored, all the assists, that he's delivered in the past. But you can't live in the past. That's just what it is. You can't live in the past. Now, at the start of the season, I said, with the players that Liverpool had brought in this season, I had Liverpool down to win the league for at least the next 4 seasons, back to back. I had them down to win the league for at least 4 seasons because of the play. I thought they did a good business going into this campaign. However, you've brought in Isak and he's, still trying to find his feet. Wirtz hasn't really lived up to expectations, but again, you have to give some of these players time. Whereas Ekitike seems to be thriving. So they do have a great nucleus. And then again, if you look at the back as well, they need fresh legs back there because Van Dijk seems a shadow of his former self. I agree with that, but that's my own assessment. Going back to Salah, yes, Salah hasn't performed well. Salah hasn't performed well. And I think he's made a mistake in coming out and airing his grievances publicly in the fashion that he did. I think he should have had that discussion behind closed doors. And again, don't forget, he did a similar thing as well. To kind of engineer that contract that he did get when they were umming and ahhing as to whether he was going to be sold or not. And he kind of forced the owner's hands to giving him that whopping contract. And yeah, some people are saying he's trying to get his way out. Some people are saying, they don't think he should have come out publicly. He could have had that conversation behind closed doors. I think even just before the interview with Salah, they interviewed Szoboszlai, and he was very professional in his outlook and on his assessment of the club at this point in time. And he basically gave a very professional response to the reporter, and just basically said, we're going through things, but we're going to try and sort it out, etc., etc., etc. But whereas Salah just come out and said, well, I'm on the bench, I signed the contract, and I've done so much for the club, I deserve better. But we have to look at fundamentals. If you are not performing, the manager has every right to put you on the bench. And you should accept the manager's decision. You should respect the manager's decision and fight for your place. It's a different thing entirely if you're getting prime Salah, who's knocking in 20, 30 goals a season, or who's red hot and he's going for an absolute purple patch. And then the manager decides to bring him off. You can understand that. You can understand a player that plays well, but then he's asked to come off or he's benched for no apparent reason. But I think in this scenario, in this instance, I think it is very well justified. I think Arne Slot is well within his right to drop Salah and put him on the bench because the player hasn't been delivering. He's 33 years old. He's not the same explosive Salah as we once saw. Whether you're suffering from delusion or whatever the case may be, or you're not the same player. Salah's not the same player, so he has to accept that. He's got to adapt, and if he feels that he's still got plenty to offer the game, that's fine. You could, January's just a couple of weeks away. You can go anywhere you like, to get your starting 11 football and get your 90 minutes game time. You can go anywhere you like, but at the end of the day, I think the manager definitely has and reserves the right to drop any player that's underperforming. And I've been saying, that Liverpool's problems, not that you want to blame a player or single them out, but you've got to be honest. I do think he hasn't delivered, and I think the manager's right to bench him. I do think the manager's right to bench him. If you're playing well, bench him. But we don't take anything away from what he's achieved in the past. We don't take anything away from all the silverware that he's brought to Liverpool. But I think he's got to look within himself, and he's got to ask some serious questions about his conduct and how he's conducting himself. But what you don't do is you don't come out and start saying all sorts and just basically just moaning about being put on the bench. Why not just perform on the pitch or perform in a training ground? And give that standard. But for me personally, I just think it's just like Ronaldo going to Man United and still demanding to start all the time. But he's over the hill as well. He's not the same 21, 22-year-old Ronaldo in the noughties that was living for United that we saw upon his return. Yes, he has the name in his Ronaldo and he's well accomplished, etc., etc. But he couldn't match the pace of the Premier League. And I think age is catching up. I think age is catching up with Salah. I think age is catching up with Salah, and it might be that time. It might be that time for him to leave Liverpool. It might be. Who knows? Who am I? Just sharing my thoughts. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.